Wanted to go ahead and give you all a warm welcome to our alumni of the University of Michigan. I am Brooklyn Posler, and I'm the Associate Director of the Alumni Career Program here. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. As we wait for some of our attendees to join us, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping notes before we get started. This is an interactive webinar that is being recorded. The recording will be shared in a follow-up email and will be posted to our video library on our website. Please submit questions for our speaker through the Q&A feature in your toolbar. We will do our very best to get to your questions, but it is possible we may not get to them all. The chat feature is also active. Please feel free to participate in discussion with other participants through the session in the chat section. So to kick us off in the chat section, please let us know where you're joining us from. I'm here today in Ann Arbor, Michigan with my colleague, Haley Briggs, our Alumni Education Program Manager. Haley, do you want to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today?
Yes, thank you for the introduction, Brooke, and thank you for everyone for being here today. We are very excited and very grateful to have Kara Becker with us as we delve into our topic, Interview Prep Like a Pro. So I'm going to share a little bit about Kara. Kara is an alum of the University of Michigan and holds an MA in Organizational Psychology with extensive coursework in counseling from Columbia University. Is certified in the Myers-Briggs assessment, is a board-certified career coach, and is an Academy-certified resume writer. Kara is passionate about career development and enjoys supporting others on their career journey. Kara helps clients make the process feel less chaotic to achieve their desired results while guiding them through all aspects of the job search process. So with that, I will turn it over to Kara.
Thank you so much, Haley. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. I love this topic. I think interviewing is, super important and one that I talk about a lot with my clients. So I'm excited to share some information with all of you today. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. All right. So we should be ready to go here. So today we're going to talk about interview prep like a pro, right? So we want to be uber prepared for our interview so that when we go in, we can ace it and we can feel like we did everything that we could to get the job. So when the employer sits down with you, they're essentially asking themselves three questions. One is, can you do the job? Two is, will you do the job? And three is, will you fit in here? So can you do the job? They're really assessing for your knowledge, your training, your expertise, your technical skills, to make sure that you have all of that. Will you do the job? They're really looking at your enthusiasm. Do you seem excited to be here? Do you seem motivated to succeed in this role, right? Like maybe you have all the skills, but do you seem to really want to be here? And then will you fit in? So this is a huge one too. They want to see, do you seem like somebody that they want to work with? Do you seem like someone that would fit in with the team? Because that's going to be really critical to your success as well. Right. So some of the objectives, what we're going to talk about today, preparing for the interview, handling interview anxiety, the types of interviews you'll encounter, mastering some interview responses, closing the deal, and interviews for specific situations. And like Haley mentioned, you're welcome to put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll try to get to those at the end as well. But I'm going to try to cover as much as I can today in the time that we have. So the first step is research. This is really going to be key to preparing for your interviews. So many times I'll meet with clients and they, go into interviews kind of blindly, and then they're not going well and they're unsure why, and they're not really putting in ample research time. So when we're researching, we want to think about looking everywhere on the company website, every nook and cranny that you can think of. We want to read Google News. We want to read profiles on LinkedIn. We want to check their company social media accounts. We want to really do our due diligence. Some of the things that you want to know. So we really want to pay attention to their customer services and or products. We want to know what they do, right? Like everything about them. When candidates are knowledgeable about what a company does and their target audience, it demonstrates transferable skills. It demonstrates that interviewee is ambitious, is organized, is truly interested in the position. And that's going to really be key for especially you career changers out there, because maybe you don't have the exact experience on your resume, but showing that you have this really in-depth knowledge of their business is going to show that you have the skills to learn, right? That you have the skills and the drive and the motivation to get all of that knowledge so that you can make that transition. You're also going to want to research your interviewer. So if you can figure out who's interviewing you, it's a great opportunity to learn about them so you can foster a meaningful conversation. So you can learn about their history, their backgrounds, maybe where they went to school, what their early career looked like. So you really want to know what they've done so that you feel more comfortable when you're meeting with them on the interview. You don't necessarily want to mention it on the interview, like, I noticed that, 3 jobs ago you did X, Y, and Z, but you definitely just want to have that understanding of who they are and where they've come from. You can do this on their social media, so that's where you can look them up. Sometimes, depending on their role, they might have a bio on the company website as well. You also want to look at the company's mission statement. So this essentially describes their motivation for being in business and the values that give it their purpose. You want to look up their history. So you want to know some of the challenges they may have had in the past, any acquisitions, any changes in growth, maybe changes in management. So we definitely want to just have an understanding of the history. The competition. So we don't just want to be aware of them, but we want to be aware of their top competitors. Oftentimes an interview question may come up where related to their competition, like, what do you know about our competition? So we definitely want to be versed there. We want to understand their unique selling position. So what makes their brand unique? What helps them compete in the market? This is going to help you to maybe propose ideas for them that you think can help them to bring their brand to the next level, right? So if you understand how they see themselves as unique in the marketplace, you might be able to offer suggestions or ideas for them as well. And that can really help you to stand out in an interview. We want to understand the company's culture. We want to understand what kind of workplace it is to see, so that you can understand what kind of place that you're walking into. I think the best way to do this is to look on social media profiles. Most importantly, the profile picture. So what kind of picture are they putting up of themselves? Are they in a suit and tie? Are they dressed more casually? What's their background like? That can give you a sense of maybe what the culture of the company is like. You can also get a sense of that from the company website to get a sense of what their vibe is. Leadership, that's going to be a big one as well. We want to understand who the senior leaders and management team is of the organization. And then latest news mentions. So anything current in the news that's written about them, good or bad, we just want to know what it is. We don't necessarily, again, want to bring it up on the interview, especially if it's something negative, but we want to be aware. At the end of the interview, you're often asked, and I'm sure many of you have been on interviews before, but you're often asked, why do you want to work for us? Or what do you know about us? Or what makes you want to, what made you want to apply for this position? Your research is going to be the most important part of that response. So when you're asked that, instead of focusing so much on you and your skills, you really want to focus on what you learned about the company and all of the things that really excited you and how that resonates to you, how that aligns with your core philosophy and values of the job that you want to do to show your genuine interest. So that's going to be a really key way to prepare for that question. Also, at the end of an interview, you're often asked, what questions do you have for me? And we'll talk a lot about that in a bit on a later slide, but the research is going to help you to formulate a lot of those questions. Okay, so I think it's important to just take a moment to talk about interview anxiety because I meet with so many clients for help with interviews. And when we talk further, what we uncover is it's not necessarily about the interview and the preparing and all of that, but it's more about the anxiety that accompanies it and that someone might feel ready and they did all the things and then they get to the interview and they freeze and they're panicked and they're feeling too nervous and they just don't perform. So I want to give some tips to help there because I think that can really help to improve your interview skills. So the first one is to practice thoroughly. So I know this sounds, obvious, but when I say practice, it's like practice again, practice until you're so sick of practicing, you can't practice anymore. The more you know your responses, the better you're going to feel about going into the interview. fear of interviewing comes from the fear of being judged and from the attention that's put on you when you're giving your responses. So by practicing your answers, you're going to remember them better. So it's going to be a little bit more natural. And also it's going to turn the act of speaking about yourself into more of an instinct. So it's going to come a little bit more easily. You're going to be able to share without having to think so hard about what you want to say. You want to over prepare in that regard. The next step, once you feel very prepared for the interview, is to do some visualizations and practice relaxation. So what I mean by that is you want to think about what you're nervous about. So are you nervous that the interviewer is going to, you're going to give a response and they're going to give a look like, what kind of response was that? Or that you're going to fumble over your answer. So you want to actually imagine that happening. So you want to, let's say, imagine you're giving an answer and the interviewer is looking at you with an expression like, what are they trying to say here? Right. And as you're doing that, what you'll notice is your heart might start to race. You might get your palms a little sweaty. You'll start to feel anxious. And that's a good thing. So that's what we want to happen. We want to increase the fear a little bit. Then what we want to do is practice taking some deep breaths and also having a self-talk strategy in place. So saying to yourself, maybe what I'm seeing is actually not what I'm seeing, right? So maybe the look on their faces of confusion is actually of like genuine interest and engagement and listening to what I have to say. And so they're just so, connected to my response. So we want to try to spin what we're thinking and getting nervous about into possibly something positive being going on. And we want to practice doing that so that in the moment, we might be able to pull that strategy into place when it's happening. It's not a foolproof way to handle it, but we just want to, kind of put ourselves in that position and practice getting ourselves out of it. The other one is getting used to embarrassment. So this is actually a strategy that people use for like social anxiety or a phobia. We want to get used to embarrassment so that it stops feeling embarrassing. So something you can do for that is like go into a crowded place, go into a restaurant and scream something out, scream something to the room. Like, who here loves football, Michigan football, right? And people will turn and look at you and they might give you a look and then they'll move on. Or another one is to dress in like really funny clothes and go sit in public and have people stare at you. And it's going to feel really embarrassing at first, but then after a few minutes, it's going to start to not bother you anymore. And that's hopefully helpful to help you move on from those embarrassing fears. We want to remember day of the interview tips. So I know these sound pretty cliche, but getting a good night's sleep before, being hydrated, having a good breakfast, doing something to relieve anxiety, like maybe a meditation or going for a jog or something that helps you to center yourself. Post-interview analysis. So we really don't want to focus on the negatives after an interview. We want to think about the positives. So I always encourage my clients after an interview to make a list of 10 things that went well. Let go of the negative, let go of the things that didn't go well, and just embrace what went well, right? So that we can move on to the next. Also accepting anxiety. So, you might get to the interview and you might stumble on a question, but accepting that, you might feel anxious. I actually like having a mantra that you say to yourself. So something that you can remind yourself in the moment, like, I know I can do this, or I know my stuff, or I know I'm a good fit for this position. So something that you can say to yourself. And also doing a mock interview. So that's something that I do with clients all the time. A mock interview is going to be a really great way to simulate the experience so that you can practice it beforehand. So you can practice on your own all you want, but there's something different about a person sitting in front of you. You can do a mock interview with a professional. You can just do it with like your partner or your friends, that they can pretend to be the interviewer and feed the questions to you. So the day of the interview, these are just some little tips that I'm sure many of you know, but often forget. I see this forgotten all the time. You want to know the employer's address and how to get there. You want to map it out and you want to get to the area like at least 30 minutes early. You don't want to be rushing or late, and that's going to cause unnecessary anxiety. You want to know the names and the roles of the interviewers that you're going to be meeting with. Sometimes this is given to you beforehand. Check the email. Sometimes someone is CC'd that you're going to be interviewing with. If no one is, you can always ask. You can always send a note and say, would you be able to tell me who I'm going to be meeting with? You want to arrive 10 minutes before the interview, not more than that. Coming more than that actually can be disruptive if the interviewer is in another meeting or they're meeting with another candidate. And so we want to come 10 minutes early. We don't want to come too early. And then we want to be courteous to the receptionist and everyone else that we encounter. I used to work in HR, and we used to always ask the receptionist about the candidates. And I can't tell you how many times she would say to us that that candidate was unfriendly or disrespectful in the waiting area. So it matters. Dress professionally. Bring plenty of resumes. Don't assume that they're going to print them out for you, and always ask for business cards and the next step in the process at the end of the interview. We want to be able to send those follow-up notes. Okay. So nonverbal communication is a big one. It includes your facial expressions, your eye contact, the tone of your voice, posture, your position if it's a group interview. We really want to think about these things. I think we get so focused on our interview responses that we forget the nonverbals. The only way to really practice your nonverbals is to sit in front of a mirror and do it, or to have somebody interview with you so they can let you know what exactly you're doing. Like, we all intend to smile on the interview, right? But are we? Are we actually smiling? Because smiling is going to help the interviewer feel connected and engaged to you. In an interview, most of it is really about the interviewer feeling a connection, even more so than your responses to the questions. We want to make good eye contact. If eye contact is uncomfortable for you, which it is for some people, we can stare right between the eyes of the person. So if you look right here, the person won't know that you're not making exact eye contact with them, and that might help you to feel a little bit better that you're you're not like connecting eyes and feeling uncomfortable there. We want to present with a firm handshake. Again, this sounds obvious, right? But you should all go home today and practice your handshakes. I can't tell you how many handshakes I would get at an interview that were either really like limp and loose or so firm and tight that they hurt my hand, right? We want something in the middle, a firm handshake, web to web, where the thumbs connect and we show that we're confident and we're excited to be there. It really does say a lot about you. We want to think about our gestures. So we don't want to have like crazy hand gestures, but we also don't want to be sitting on our hands. We want them to be appropriate to the conversation. Obviously, online interviewing is a whole different ball game. So, if we are doing an online interview, then that might be a little different. And then being visible in groups. So group interviewing is its whole other category of interviewing. But in a group, you really want to think about your position. You don't want to be answering always first. You don't want to be answering always last. You want to kind of find somewhere in the middle if it's you and a lot of candidates. If it's you and a lot of interviewers, you want to think about making eye contact with everyone and not just staring at one person. And you really want to think about addressing everyone in the room. Studies have shown that 65% of the conveyed message is nonverbal. So that's really big. And unfortunately, what happens is a lot of that is determined in the first 3 minutes of the interview. So we really want to nail the nonverbals right off the bat. Okay, so types of interviews we're going to talk about today. So we're going to focus on the traditional interview questions, just a few of them for what we have time for, and some of the behavioral interview questions, because those are really some of the main ones. We're not going to talk about case interviews or technical today, but I will, just to give a tip on preparing for those. I think the best way to prepare for a case or a technical is really to seek out people who do the jobs that you're looking to have and have them help you prepare. So you can either do some networking and build some connections and maybe develop some mentors out there in your field that can help you with this kind of preparation. You can also read some books. So on vault.com, they have EPUBs on how to crack the case interview and training videos. You can do a Google search. LinkedIn Learning might even have training videos on how to do these types of interviews. There's definitely an art to them to master them. In terms of traditional interview questions, they're going to be your basics, like tell me about yourself, your background, your strengths, your weaknesses. Behavioral questions are going to be those, tell me about a time when you did X, Y, and Z. So those are the questions we're going to talk a little bit more about now. Okay, so the first step in understanding an interview is understanding what kind of question you're being asked. So here's a list from Career One Stop of some of the most common interview questions. So you can see here, this is a traditional question. These are some of those traditional. And when you see traditional, that really means you answer it pretty straightforward what they're asking. Behavioral, there's going to be some sort of technique to use to answer those questions. And so we want to make sure that we know the difference. And we're going to talk more about that now. So in preparing for your interviews, your first step is going to be to access that job description. That job description should be your best friend in preparing your interview responses. So when looking at the job description and thinking back to my time in HR, these JDs are written over weeks and weeks and weeks. There is so much thought put into every single word that is written on this JD. They don't just draft this in a minute. They don't have like a generic one that goes around. They think about every word. They meet with the team. They put things in. They take things out. They're really careful about what they put in there. And so you want to use this as your master list of what you need to be versed in when you're on the interview. So you can see here, I'm circling some of the things that they want from this candidate, right? They want their ideal candidate to be able to do all of these things and more. So once you circle that, you go through your JD and you can highlight, you can circle all of the competencies on there that they're looking for that are ones that you possess, right? You then want to create a core competency list with some examples. So here I took some of those competencies that we just circled and wrote them in the blue boxes. And then for each one, I made up, right, this just for the sake of the presentation, 2 examples that demonstrate that skill. So communication, right? I'm going on an interview and they're really looking for solid communication skills. And I'm thinking, oh, I have this story where I had that irate team member and I used my communication skills to diffuse the situation. And that could be a good thing to talk about in an interview. Or, oh, I had this really difficult conversation with my boss recently when there was an ethical dilemma happening and I had to, loop in my boss and talk about what was going on. So we want to think about all of our competencies and we want to think about all of our examples to go along with it. Then when we're starting to prepare for specific questions, the first most common question that we're asked is, tell me about yourself. This is really going to be key. This is the one you want to nail because this is the first question of the interview. This sets the tone. This is also typically one of your longer or longest responses. And so you really want to have a solid answer here. This is a little formula to putting the question together. It's not the only way to do it, but this is one that I often talk about with clients and I like using. So we want to start with the present, what we're doing right now, right? What is going on in our current situation. Then we want to talk about our past achievements in a story format. So we want to go back in time and kind of talk about how we got to be where we are today. And then in step 3, we want to share our future plans, especially for the job we're interviewing for. So how does all of that tie to where we are right now? So if we were to put this into an example, here's just a resume I found online. If we look at the top here, this person has all their accomplishments up at the top. So in the beginning of the question, we're going to talk about what some of those major accomplishments are that this person has experienced in their career. So some of the things that I'm doing in my current role, some of the major accomplishments I've had are X, Y, and Z. And then we're going to go back in time and tell our career story. So, I got my bachelor's in econ and finance and my master's in accounting. Use this to, the reason for choosing this field was X, Y, and Z. I decided to start out in finance because I thought this would be a great way to build foundational skills. I moved on to financial analyst. Here are some of the things I did there. And, that brought me to my role now. And then we're going to talk about how that now segues this person into this new opportunity. I really want to use all of this experience to now do X, Y, and Z at this new organization. Okay, so this question definitely requires time and thought to really think about how you want to phrase it and how you want to market yourself. What I love about having a solid answer to this is that this question can be answered anywhere. So this doesn't have to be an interview response. This can be given at a career fair or at an event, a networking event, even in, the typical like elevator pitch. Like, let's say, you get into the elevator and someone walks in, it's like that can you pitch yourself to them in that 60 to 90 seconds. Maybe you're at the gym and you start talking to somebody and they work somewhere that is really interesting to you. Give your tell me about yourself answer, to pitch yourself. So that's really what it is at the end of the day. Okay. So next we're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses question. I think this is one that comes up a lot. The best way to answer the strengths is to give 3. So we don't want to give 1, we want to give 3. We want to give a solid amount of strengths, and we want to pull those strengths from that job description. So these are 3 strengths, 3 competencies that we just circled in that job description a few slides back, that they're looking for. We want to give strengths that are things that they're asking for, right? We don't want to just give 3 other things. So when we give our strengths, what we want to do is we want to share each one and then give a concrete, specific example to back it up. So we want to say, one of our strengths are our communication skills. An example of this is, and give that example. And we want to do the same for the other 2. Then in the reverse, when we're thinking about our weaknesses, we don't want to give 3, we want to give 1, right? And there's several ways to answer this question. So oftentimes I hear somebody giving a weakness that's really a strength disguised as a weakness, right? Like, my weakness is that I'm a perfectionist, right? Like, that's not a weakness, that's a strength. Like, let's be real. Companies would love to have someone that's a perfectionist. Another typical answer that people give is a former weakness, right? Like, I used to have a fear of public speaking, but I, took all these courses and classes and now I public speak all the time. Again, a little bit of a cop-out answer, right? It's a former weakness, it's not a weakness anymore. The third way to answer it, and the way that I really encourage clients to answer this when I work with them, is to give a real, genuine weakness, something that is something that you struggle with. Companies are not looking for someone who's perfect. They're looking for someone who's self-aware. And so in order to be self-aware, we have to understand what our strengths are, but also what our weaknesses are. So we want to give something that really is genuinely something that we work on. However, we don't want to give a weakness that's critical for the job. So we don't want to say, if this is a job that's looking for you to be able to, work independently, as we're seeing on the left, you don't want to say, my weakness is working alone. I really do better working as a team, right? We don't want to ding ourselves in that way. But if we can think of something that is really an area that we work on, then that's fine to share. We want to share what it is and how we stay aware of it and what kinds of things we do to work on it to improve. Sometimes it's easier to think about this because everyone will always say to me, well, what's an example? I can't think of anything. Try to take yourself out of the mindset of work, right? A weakness at work. Just think about what's a weakness you have in life in general, in friendships, in relationships, in interactions, right? What's something that you just find that you struggle with? Because most likely you can then apply that to the workplace and use that as, something that could be a challenge for you. Okay. So now to talk about behavioral questions. Behavioral questions are a biggie in an interview. They're a type of interview question that employers really like to ask. What it is it's a question that asks about something that happened in the past in a vague way, right? It's not asking about a specific situation. It's requiring you to draw on a situation where this happened to you. So the philosophy behind behavioral interview questions is that your past behavior is a predictor of your future performance. So how you handled that situation in the past is going to predict to the employer how you would handle that situation if it were to arise at their organization. So you could see here, there are 3 behavioral questions that I put up. So these questions are hard. And your goal is not to prepare a story for every single behavioral question there is, because there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, right? There's so many different behavioral questions that can be asked, and there's no way that you can be prepared for every single one. So what you want to do is hear the question and then think to yourself, what is the competency that they're trying to get at? What are they trying to learn about me here? And what story do I have to support that competency? So if we look at the first one, describe a problem that you have faced and how you dealt with it. The competency here is problem solving, right? They're looking for problem solving skills. In the second one, perhaps they're looking for someone who's self-directed or takes initiative or leadership skills, right? Those are the competencies that they'd be looking for there. In the third one, they're looking for someone who excels in group work or communication skills. So we want to think about what the competency is and then think about our story, because the same behavioral question can be asked in so many different ways to get at the same competency. So I'll give you an example of that right here. So all of these questions are actually asking the same competency, right? Explain how you handled a difficult situation, or recall a time and use crisis management skills. These are all looking at what your problem solving skills are. So if we can go back several slides ago to where I created that competency list and we had problem solving in the box, we can look at what stories do we have to support problem solving that we can use to answer this question. So we want to answer these questions essentially in the reverse, right? Instead of taking the question and thinking of a story, we want to think about all our stories and which one fits into this question, okay? When we're answering the question, here's a great formula to use. It's called SARA. It helps to provide structure to your answer. So the first way we want to answer is give an overview of the situation. What was the problem going on? What was happening? What were you trying to achieve? Give some context. The second area is the actions. What actions did you take to address this issue? Then we want to talk about the results. What was the outcome based on the actions that you took? And the application, what lessons did you learn or skills did you gain that helped to contribute to the success here? So plugging it into this formula can help. I would say so many people will give the situation, they'll give the action, maybe they'll give the application. So many people forget the result. We really want to hone in on those results. The best results are going to be ones that are quantifiable, right? A real tangible result, something that happened in the company. If there's none, then a qualitative result works too. So I'm just going to read to you like a little example just to demonstrate. So a colleague of mine had been consistently late to several meetings, which made them less productive and was disrespectful for many people. I knew I had to bring this to it. So that's the, and I knew I had to bring this to his attention and discuss it with him as his supervisor. So that's the situation, what was going on. Then we're going to talk about the actions. At the end of a regular meeting I had with him, I shared with him that he seemed to be stressed, and I noticed he had been late to several meetings, including the meeting at hand, and asked what the impact, and shared what the impact had been. I got curious to see if there was something going on that I wasn't aware of, and he was actually able to share with me that he was getting a late start to his day all week because he had a sick child at home. Then that pushed everything else behind, and all of his meetings ran late throughout the week. So that's the actions, right? I had a conversation, and I was curious with him to see what was going on. The result, by bringing this up with him and getting curious about it, we were able to discuss how he might set a boundary in order to end each of his meetings on time so he could show up on time for the next meeting. The discussion helped him feel like he was able to make a hard stop when meetings ran out of time so that he could move on to the next one, and it reduced his stress as well. The even bigger result of this is an improvement in our overall team dynamics. And recently we were able to close a $2 million deal based on one of our meetings that was a great brainstorming meeting for the team. So now we talked about a qualitative result, right? And we also talked about a quantitative result. And then for application, we can say this experience showed me the importance of open lines of communication with your team and to always approach issues with curiosity instead of judgment on people. So that's just a quick answer. You know, obviously this didn't happen, so I'm kind of making it up. Behavioral responses are going to be longer than others, right? Because you have to give the context and you have to share what's going on. Okay. So handling questions that you didn't prepare. So you can do all that preparation, right? And you can have your competencies and have your stories and feel ready to go. But the truth is that there's always going to be questions that come up that you didn't prepare. And we want to think back to handling the interview anxiety, right? Like what things you can do in that moment when you're asked a question you didn't prepare. And we want to think about our competency list, and we want to think about all of the preparation that we've done. But here are some things that you can do when that happens. So the first one is silence is okay. So people tend to want to jump into the answer, right? They just want to start talking because silence can be uncomfortable and it can be awkward. But silence is okay. You can actually pause and listen to the question and give yourself a minute to collect your thoughts. You can stay silent for 5, 10, 15 seconds. That's okay. If you're finding the silence really uncomfortable, you can say to the interviewer, "That's a really great question. Do you mind if I take a moment to think about my answer?" Collect your thoughts. I would much rather someone give a thoughtful answer than just jump into something. While you're thinking, you want to say to yourself, what is the competency that they're trying to get at here? What is the skill they're trying to get at? What do they want to learn about me? You want to think about what are they trying to get at, so you can think, do I already have an answer prepared for this that I can apply to this question? We want to think back to that list of our stories, right? Or maybe we have something that outside of that. It is okay if you don't have a story from a professional experience to give a personal story as well, if there's really nothing professional that you can share. And if there's really nothing that you can think of, it's okay to answer in the hypothetical. So, that's a really great question. And that actually hasn't specifically happened to me before. But if I was in that situation, what I would do is and give a hypothetical. I don't prefer these answers to real examples just because they're not as strong. They kind of go against the theory of a behavioral interview question because they haven't actually happened, but they're okay in that moment. And then lastly is, in the end, we want to always tie questions back to the role at hand. So what happens is when we're asked a question that we didn't prepare, the tendency is for someone to go on a ramble, right? Because we'll keep rambling until we get ourselves to a point where, like, okay, I think we answered the question, and then we're stuck and we don't know how to end. We just keep going. I'm sure that's happened to many of you before. And so when we feel like we've answered the question, in order to get to that period end of sentence, we tie it back to the role. So, and all of this is going to be helpful in this role because of X, Y, and Z, period, end it, right? So that we don't find ourselves just going off on a tangent. So next is talking about concluding the interview. So at the end of the interview, the employer is often going to say to you, do you have any questions for me? I think this is a really, really important question. We don't ever want to say no. We don't have any questions, right? Because we want to show the employer that we're curious and we're interested and we're excited. And so by having questions, that helps to demonstrate that. I usually recommend that someone comes prepared with 10 questions, because what happens is along the way, some things could have gotten answered, or you could forget some of the things on your list. And so we want to, again, over prepare in this regard. So we want to have a combo of questions, of different types of questions to ask the interviewer. So we want half of our questions to actually be questions that we have about the role, right? We want to ask things that are important for us to know. Like, for example, what is the management style of the team leader, right? That might be really important for us to know because we know our management style and we know how we like to work. And so we want to see what's the style of the team so that we can see if it's in alignment with our values. So we want to make sure that we are getting answers to questions to help us decide if this is the right position for me. Sometimes in an interview, we're so focused on getting the job that we forget we need to assess, do I even want to work here, right? A lot of times a candidate will walk out and they'll say, I don't even know if I want to do it. Like, I'm not sure. I don't have a sense of like if it's the right fit for me. So we want to have some of those questions prepared that will help us understand, is this the right fit? The other half of our questions, we want to be ones that can really genuinely impress the employer to show them that we're interested in the role. So those questions can come from that company research that we did many slides back, right? So you have a big focus on community involvement and community outreach. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of those programs that you do, outside of the scope of one's day-to-day responsibilities, right? So we want questions where the employer will be like, oh, wow, they really dug deep in our website and learned a lot about us. We also want to ask about next steps in the hiring process, what other information they might need, when we can expect to hear from them, because we also want to leave having a sense of what the timelines are. They might say, oh, we're actually going to be interviewing for the next 2 months. And that can be really helpful for your own anxiety, right? To know that you might not hear for several months. You can also ask if you don't hear from them by a certain amount of date, would it be okay to contact them? We do want to make sure that we collect those business cards so that we have emails in case you don't have those from the initial outreach. And we want to send a thank you letter to everyone who interviewed you within 24 to 48 hours. Email thank yous are fine. We want to write more than just thank you. We want to use the thank you as an opportunity to reiterate interest in the opportunity, to maybe share some things that, maybe you walked out of the interview, you're like, oh, I had a great story to share about something and I didn't get to, give you a chance to maybe share something that you didn't get to on the interview, and maybe reiterate any points that you made that you think are really helpful to your candidacy. We also want to make sure, if you're interviewed by multiple people, that we send drastically different thank you letters to the different interviewers. I can tell you from experience, having interviewed before, that we would often go to each other and compare our thank yous. And if they were identical or 90% identical, that was a huge negative for that client. And it would actually push them down on the list of, the top candidates in the end. Okay. So responding to a job offer. When a job offer comes in, the most important thing is don't accept it immediately. So when I used to make offers, so many times someone would accept it. They were so excited. They say, oh, yes. And I'd say, great, they're in. And then they would actually end up retracting it because they didn't really mean to say yes, or they were waiting on something else. And it's really important, and it's a good practice to just never accept anything immediately, to be comfortable taking the time to think it through. So we want to determine the time frame that's appropriate to get back with a response. So you can say, I'm so honored that, to be offered this. I would like to take a little time to think about it. When can I get back to you? Or would it be okay if I got back to you in 4 days? We obviously want to come up with something reasonable. We can touch base with any previous contacts to help us debrief on the interview, on the offer, and see if it's something that we want to take. And this is the best time to negotiate salary. So once you have the offer, you have, the upper hand, right? And so that's really the best point in time to negotiate salary. I always tell people to really try to defer those conversations to the job offer, or at the very least, the final stage interview. When you're thinking about an offer, also, it's really important to think about the overall package. So it's not just about the numerical value of the salary. We want to think about some of these other aspects, because they all have a price assigned to them, right? So, are you going to be traveling a lot? Like maybe, one job you're going to be traveling 50+% of the time and paid more, but one you're going to be traveling 0% of the time and paid a little less. Like, what's the price that you can assign to the travel or the lack of travel? Continuing ed is a big one, right? Are they willing to pay for you to go get an MBA or a master's degree, or just to do courses to continue your learning? Maybe they're paying a little less, but are they willing to give you a review in 6 months to possibly give you a raise then? So we want to think about all of those aspects. So next is just some unique situations that can come up in an interview. So career changers, right? It happens a lot. It's really common these days to have several different careers in our professional history, in our professional experience. And so when you're a career changer on the interview, the major focus should be on those transferable skills. Really thinking about what you've done, maybe in a different context, but how that skill or competency is still transferable to the new type of role, and how that's still going to help you succeed. We want to focus on results. So a result is a result is a result at any business, right? Businesses run on results and metrics and success. And so showing that you've helped to get results is going to still carry its weight no matter what type of business you're moving from to another. Also doing incredible company research. So really going above and beyond, because that's going to show that you're really committed to making this change and you're really eager to start something new. Return to the workforce is another. So perhaps you've been out of the workforce to raise children or to care for a loved one. That's okay. And what we want to show with that gap in time is what you did with it, right? So maybe you were doing other things, but what was your commitment to education or to learning or to keeping your skills fresh during that point in time? So it's really important to, do courses on LinkedIn Learning or just do a simple Google search to find learning opportunities. Forage, Forage, is a really cool website where you can do virtual internships that you can put on your resume to show just a maintenance and skills or a building of new skills. And then challenging situations. So red flags that might come up, right? Like getting fired or getting laid off or ageism. So if you ever sense that there's an elephant in the room, right? It's up to you if you're comfortable to address it. But I always say that I think it's probably better to address it if you sense that elephant is really there, because it will help you to feel more comfortable in the interview, and it will possibly address something that they're thinking about as well. So you can say, I know I'm not your typical client. Maybe I've had previous experience or I'm older than other clients, but here are the reasons why I think that will actually be of value to your organization, and come up with some reasons why. Or maybe if you sense you're overqualified, to address that you understand that you're overqualified, but your commitment is to find an organization that you're going to be with long term. And so even if maybe you're doing work that is a little lesser now, your goal is to eventually, get back to a place where you're doing more and you're willing to put that time in. So we always want to spin positive. We always want to show that we're going to rise to the occasion, right? If we have been laid off or we were fired, we want to really be very brief in those stories. We never want to be negative. And we always want to just get to the point and, focus on the job at hand. Like, I'm really eager about this opportunity. And this is what I want to focus on. So this is just a snapshot of my website. I do a lot of different things related to career development, and mock interviewing is one of them. And I think that's just really fitting for this presentation today, because it's a great service. And I really love doing mock interviews with clients. So the way that I structure that is it's typically about an hour and a 15-minute session. And we will do a practice interview together where I will assume the role of the recruiter or the interviewer and actually conduct an interview. And then we will end the interview, and then we will spend the rest of the time doing extensive feedback on the responses and redoing some of the answers and helping to really build those skills in the areas that maybe are more challenging for you. So you can always reach out if you wanted to get more information or do a consult call on anything that I do. So that being said, I can take some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kara. So we are going to jump right into our Q&A. And I know we mentioned we received a lot of questions in advance and through our Q&A box here during our live event. So we're going to try to get to as many as we can. But our first question was submitted, comes from our audience. How do any of these tips, and you shared some wonderful interview tips, but how do these translate to a virtual interview? And what changes might a candidate do to approach an interview, a virtual interview? Mm-hmm.
So virtual interview, I mean, really with the interview responses, it's going to be identical, right? So we want to be solid in our research. We want to have our competency list. We want to answer the questions in a thoughtful way. The major one with a virtual interview is going to be the nonverbals. So really thinking about the nonverbals in a different way. Like we lose the ability to have the engagement with our hands, right? Which can sometimes help to convey interest. So we want to convey that with our voice, with our tone, with our facial facial expressions, so that we show an interest. We also want to make sure, this is a big one, and I've been doing this the whole presentation, we want to look at the camera and not ourselves. We have a tendency to like look at ourselves, which I'm doing right now in the little box on Zoom. We want to look at the camera, so that it helps to show that we're making eye contact. Actually, if I move, right, I just moved my my Zoom screen to the center so that now it appears more like I'm looking at the camera, even if I'm looking at myself. It's just a little trickier with a presentation to have the Zoom box in the middle. We also want to think about our backgrounds, right? We want to have a very simple, plain background, nothing distracting. We still want to think about our appearance, like that we're dressed professionally, like none of that goes out the window. So it's really that focus on the nonverbals with the virtual interviews. Oh, and we also want to test our Wi-Fi, our sound, all of that.
Okay, those are great tips. Also tips we can use when we're hosting a webinar like we are today. I'm actually going to turn it over to Brooke for our next question.
Yeah, so thanks, Haley. We had a question submitted that if after an interview begins and I realize that the job or culture is not a good fit for me, can I graciously bow out right at that moment, or do I go through with the entire interview?
So while it might feel like a huge waste of time, I would say that it's important to still ride it out, right? Even if we know that this is not for us, or we walked into the office, we're like, oh, this is not what I was expecting. Any interview is going to help to build your skills. And so you just want to change your mindset to, instead being like disappointed or, discouraged, to be like, okay, I'm going to use this as a chance to practice and to learn, and to test out some of my answers so that I can bring that with me to the next interview. Every interview is a learning experience. So I actually tell clients sometimes, if they get an interview and they know that they don't even want that job at that point, to still go on the interview, right? Just go on it and use it as a practice. It's no sweat off their back. They're interviewing people anyway. And you might surprise yourself, right? Even with the question that was just asked, you might by the end be like, oh, actually, this is better than I thought. So it's always worth sticking it out.
Yeah, that's great advice. So similarly to being surprised when you show up at the interview, Gabriel asked a question in the chat that, is it possible to be overdressed for an interview? They recently showed up to an interview in a suit and their interviewer was wearing a hoodie. Does overdressing impact the interview negatively?
Yes, it absolutely can. That's a really great question. So when we're doing that research, and I talked earlier about researching culture, we want to research the culture of the organization, and that includes dress code and attire. It's hard to find it out for sure, but we want to do the best we can. One way that we can do that is look at those LinkedIn profile pictures, right? So what are they wearing? Are they wearing hoodies? Are they, super casual? Are they showing themselves like, outside in a park? Like, we want to try to understand the culture. We also can do some research, like maybe you can do some networking. See if you have a friend or a colleague or someone who used to work for that organization or knows someone at that organization, to see if you can do a little detective work there. You want to still dress professional. I usually suggest, like, whatever you think their attire is, go one notch above. So obviously if they're in hoodies, a suit is going to be many notches above, right? So maybe you go in like like a Henley, like button down shirt with slacks. Maybe you do a dress shirt but wear sneakers, right? So you think about going a notch above, because you still want to dress to impress, but yes, you want to show that you understand their business, and by completely mismatch in the dress, it's showing them that you're not really so cognizant of like what their business does.
That's great. So I think it all comes back to prepare. Do that research beforehand. I'll pass it back over to Haley for our next questions.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so this came from our audience as well today. Do you have any specific tips for internal applicants, for interns applying for a staff position, or for a staff person maybe applying for a higher position? So when you already sort of probably know some of the interview panel.
Right. I mean, I think the tendency with that is to think you got this, right? And to not prepare, or to not research the company because you think you work there and you know all about it, but you really still want to do that research. You really want to understand the company from a different lens, right? You might not you might never have read like their, their website before, or their mission statement or their values, but you definitely want to read that so that in an interview, you can show them how, not how you think it aligns with you as a external candidate, but how you know it aligns with you as an internal candidate. So you want to still do all of that research, and you really want to make sure that you're prepared. You also could take advantage of the ability to network within the organization. So networking with people that can maybe give you some insight of like what they would be looking for, so that you can really speak to, what you think that they want to hear you say.
Yeah, those are great tips. So I know you touched on the best time to negotiate a salary, but what if the posted salary was below an interviewee's expectations? How and when does someone bring this up in an interview process?
So salary is a really delicate topic. I really do encourage people to defer the conversation as long as they can. If you are asked during the initial screening, or maybe you applied anyway, knowing it was lower, you can always say to them, I understand the salary is X. I want to learn more about the responsibilities of the role, before I can give you a meaningful answer. Like if it's a fit for me, like that's okay for you to want to learn more about the position. You can always say to them, I'm making X right now. Like everyone, I'd like to improve on that figure. But my major interest is the job itself. So, I'm still eager and excited to be here and interview with you. So we do always want to keep it positive, but we can make those kind of comments. Just know that the act of taking a new job in and of itself does not make you worth more money, right? So it's about why you believe that you're worth more money. So you want to have those evidence points handy, right, to be able to say, well, I think I'm worth more money for X, Y, and Z reasons. I think the most important thing is to always stress that the job itself is the most important thing to you. Because sometimes if the interviewer is pressing on salary, they may actually have wiggle room, but they're just trying to determine how badly or how much you want the job. So, you really have to read the room and like what's going on. If they're like, this is the salary, there's no ifs, ands, or buts, like we will not negotiate it later, it's really on you to just think about, is this something that I'm willing to do? But really, I've found that the former is more common than the latter.
Okay, that's great. I'm gonna pop it over back to Brooke for our final question.
Yeah, so this one comes from our chat section from Brian. Brian said, how many stories or situations would you recommend to have prepared in advance? And then similarly, Elizabeth had asked in our Q&A, if you're doing interviews with multiple people at a company on the same day, how much should those answers vary? Can you reuse the same stories over and over again, or should there be variation?
Good question. So to address the first question, I would say that you really want to cover most of the competencies on the job description. So, because any of those are fair game to be asked. And so as long as you have a story that can kind of cover almost everything on there, that'll really help in your preparedness. We have to be mindful of like our sanity, right? We don't want to prepare hundreds of stories. I typically, when I do this with clients, like you max out at a point, right? You only have so many stories and so many things. If I had to assign a number to it, I'd say, I don't know, maybe like 10 to 12 stories. It's not like a huge number, because what you'll find is that you really can adjust your story to apply to so many different questions, like that slide I showed earlier. And you might have to like adjust the answer a little bit. Like it might not fit perfectly into a different version of the question, but like the more you practice, the more you'll be able to adjust the question slightly so that it fits into another question. In terms of the multiple interviewers, if they're not in the same room, right? And so it's not like, there's different, it's like one interview, then the next interview. It's okay to reuse the story. It's very unlikely that you're going to be giving the exact same answers, because it's not likely they're going to be asking the same question. Every interviewer has their own style. They have their own way of asking things. They're going to be trying to get at different things. So it's more likely that the interviews are going to be different. If it comes up, though, that something overlaps, it's okay to give the story again.
That's great. Thanks, Kara.
All right. Well, we
Haley?
are at the top of the hour, so please join me in extending a genuine and heartfelt thank you to Kara Becker for being with us today. So many good tips were shared here. Please also feel free to check out her website, karabecker.com/career. That link should be popping into the chat from my colleague, Brooke. Thank you, Brooke. And again, Kara, thank you for your time and expertise. We are so grateful for you to give back to your fellow alumni community here. And we'd like to remind our alumni that a recording of today's session will be sent as a follow-up. Please use that link shared in the chat to complete our survey and let us know how we did. And also don't forget to explore our website. That's alumni.umich.edu/career. Thanks everyone, and go blue.
Go Blue.